The first time I realized the HOA had stolen 50 acres of my farm, I was standing in a county courtroom watching a woman point at a map and calmly claim that my land had belonged to her family for years. Her name was Karen Whitmore, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. She wore a cream-colored blazer, pearl earrings, and the kind of confident smile that made you wonder if you were the one who had misunderstood reality. Then she looked directly at me. "You bought the house," she said. "You never bought those 50 acres. My stomach tightened. "That's impossible." Karen tilted her head. "Is it?" Behind her, two lawyers whispered over a stack of documents. Across the courtroom, the county surveyor stared at the same map with a face that had gone completely pale. I looked down at the property deed in my hands. My name was printed clearly across the top. Ethan Cole. Owner. Farm parcel. All recorded boundaries included. Everything I had paid for. Everything I had spent my savings restoring. And according to Karen Whitmore, 50 acres of it had already been sold to people who didn't even know I existed. I turned toward my attorney, Daniel Mercer. "Tell me she's lying." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He slowly opened the folder in front of him and pulled out a document, then another, then another. His expression changed. "Ethan," he whispered, "we need to talk." The courtroom suddenly felt too small. 3 months earlier, I had bought the abandoned farm because I thought I was getting a second chance at life. The property had been empty for almost a decade. The farmhouse needed repairs. The barns were collapsing. The fields were buried beneath weeds. But the land was beautiful. 50 acres of open ground stretched behind the old farmhouse, bordered by a creek and a line of ancient oak trees. I thought I had bought a forgotten piece of America. I had no idea someone else had been quietly selling pieces of it. And Karen wasn't just claiming ownership. She had apparently collected money from multiple buyers. Lots of money. Daniel slid one final document across the table. I looked at it. Then I looked at him. "Where did you get this?" His voice dropped. "County Archives." I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was Karen's. But the date was from 2 years before I ever bought the farm. My hands went cold. Because if that document was real, Karen hadn't simply tried to take my land. She had been selling it long before I ever arrived. And somehow, nobody had stopped her. Not the county. Not the HOA. Not the title company. Nobody. Then the judge leaned forward and asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Cole, how certain are you that the property you purchased legally existed under that parcel number?" I looked at Daniel. He looked back at me, and for the first time since buying the farm, I wondered if I had ever actually owned it at all. "My name is Ethan Cole. I was 38 years old, and before buying that farm, I worked as a civil construction estimator in Fort Worth, Texas. I wasn't wealthy. I wasn't a lawyer, and I definitely wasn't someone who enjoyed conflict. I spent most of my life believing that if you worked hard, paid what you owed, and kept your paperwork in order, people generally left you alone. That belief ended the day I bought the farm. The property sat outside a small town called Belhaven, about 40 minutes from the nearest city. The farmhouse was ugly in photographs and somehow even uglier in person. The porch sagged. Several windows were broken. The kitchen cabinets were warped from years of humidity. But when I stood on the back porch and looked across the fields, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My father had grown up on a farm in Oklahoma, and when I was a kid, he used to tell me that land had a memory. Buildings get replaced, he'd say. Fences get moved, but land remembers who cared for it. After he died, I started thinking about those words more often. So when I found the Belhaven property at an estate auction, I took a chance. The previous owner had died, and the farm had apparently been abandoned for years. The title company found no major liens. The county records showed the parcel as one continuous tract. I signed everything. I wired the money. And 2 weeks later I received the keys. For the first month, everything felt normal. I repaired the porch, cleared brush from the driveway, and hired a local contractor to stabilize the old barn. Then I noticed the mailbox. Someone had attached a small white sticker to it. Cedar Ridge HOA, violation notice. I actually laughed. There wasn't an HOA. At least not according to my closing documents. I called the number printed on the notice. A woman's voice answered. "Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association." "Hi," I said. "I think you've got the wrong property." "What address?" I gave it to her. There was a pause. "No," she said, "we have the correct address. I just bought the farm. There's no HOA listed on my deed." Her tone changed. "Mr. Cole, you're inside the Cedar Ridge development boundaries." I looked across the empty fields. Development? Yes. I almost laughed again. There wasn't a development anywhere near me. There were a few houses scattered along the county road, but my farm had been agricultural land for decades. Then she said something that made me stop smiling. Your property is subject to our access and land use restrictions. Show me where I agreed to that. Another pause. You'll receive a formal notice. The call ended. 3 days later, an unfamiliar black SUV rolled slowly past my farmhouse. It stopped beside my fence. A woman stepped out. Cream blouse, sunglasses, perfectly styled blonde hair. She looked at the farmhouse, then at the fields. Finally, she looked directly at me. She smiled. But there was nothing friendly about it. Mr. Cole? Yes? She removed her sunglasses. I'm Karen Whitmore. We need to discuss those 50 acres. That was the first time I heard her name. And I still didn't understand why she was looking at my land like she had already bought it. Karen Whitmore walked through my front gate without waiting for an invitation. I stepped off the porch. You can't just come onto my property. She stopped beside the gravel drive and looked around as though she were inspecting a house she already owned. I can if there's an easement. Show me the easement. Her smile disappeared. You're going to make this difficult, aren't you? I bought the property. I'm just asking for proof. Karen folded her arms. The 50 acres behind this house were transferred into Cedar Ridge's development plan years ago. I stared at her. Transferred by who? That isn't your concern. It becomes my concern when you're telling me I don't own my own land. She took a folder from her SUV and pulled out several pages. These parcels were sold under HOA authority. I looked at the documents. The first page showed a rough subdivision map. Several sections of my farm were outlined in red. That's not my survey. Karen shrugged. It's the association's survey. Your association doesn't get to redraw county property lines. Her expression hardened. You really don't understand how this works. No, apparently you do. She stepped closer. You're living on land that's been designated for community expansion. I laughed once. It wasn't funny. Community expansion? Karen, there isn't even a road back there. There will be. When? Soon. I looked at the fields behind her. Who bought it? She didn't answer. That silence told me more than anything else could have. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the sheriff. Karen's eyes narrowed. You're threatening me. No. I'm documenting this conversation. I raised the phone. She immediately stepped backward. Fine, she said, but you're going to regret this. 20 minutes later, a county deputy arrived. Karen spoke first. She showed him her documents pointed toward the fields and told him I had been trespassing on HOA-controlled property. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. The deputy finally turned toward me. Do you have your deed? I handed it over. He studied it carefully. This says Mr. Cole owns the parcel. Karen immediately interrupted. That's incomplete. The deputy looked at her. Incomplete how? The agricultural portion was transferred separately. Do you have that transfer document? Karen hesitated. I have records. That isn't what I asked. Her face tightened. The deputy returned my deed. I don't see a criminal issue here. Karen stared at him. This isn't over. After he left, I watched her SUV disappear down the road. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning, I found a bright orange notice nailed to my barn. Uneized structure. Remove within 72 hours. The structure was the barn that had been standing there since before I was born. Then another notice appeared on my gate, then one on the farmhouse. By Friday, I had 6 violations. I called Karen. She answered on the first ring. You're harassing me, I said. No, Ethan. I'm enforcing community rules. There is no community. She laughed softly. You'll learn. That evening, I checked my email. There were 11 new messages. 5 were from strangers claiming I had no right to access parts of my own property. 3 demanded I remove fencing. 2 threatened legal action. The final message contained an attachment. I opened it. It was a sales contract. My stomach dropped. Someone had apparently purchased 10 acres of my farm from Cedar Ridge HOA. The buyer's closing date was 6 months earlier, before I had ever bought the property. I stared at the screen. Then I opened another contract, another 10 acres, then another. 5 contracts, 50 acres total, and every one of them listed Cedar Ridge HOA as the seller. That was when I realized this wasn't an HOA dispute. Someone had been selling my land, and they had been doing it long before I arrived. The next morning I drove straight to Belhaven County Records. I had stopped being angry by then. Anger was useless. I wanted documents. The clerk, an older man named Walter Briggs, recognized the parcel number on my deed and frowned. You're the farm buyer? Yes. Walter lowered his voice. I was wondering when you'd come in. That sentence made my chest tighten. You knew about this? I knew there was a problem. He pulled a thick folder from a cabinet. Inside were surveys, plats, transfer requests, tax records, and handwritten notes from previous county reviews. I spread everything across the counter. The first survey showed my farm as one continuous 50-acre tract. The next document showed something completely different. Someone had divided the land into 5 10-acre parcels. I checked the date, 2 years before my purchase. Who authorized this? Walter pointed to a signature. That's where it gets strange. The signature belonged to Karen Whitmore, but beneath it was a reference to an HOA resolution. Can an HOA subdivide private agricultural land? I asked. Walter shook his head, not without the owner's authorization and county approval. Was there approval? He looked uncomfortable. That's what we're trying to determine. I spent the next 3 hours copying every document I could legally obtain. Then I called Daniel Mercer, an attorney I knew through a former construction client. He met me at a coffee shop that afternoon. Daniel was 47, quiet, methodical, and the kind of lawyer who rarely reacted visibly to bad news. He spread the documents across the table. Where's the original survey? I don't have it. Then we find it. What are you looking for? Something Karen couldn't manufacture. We requested archived surveys from the county, pulled historical tax maps, and contacted the title company that handled my purchase. The first contradiction appeared that evening. The HOA claimed the 50 acres had been transferred into its control, but county tax records showed I had been paying property taxes on the entire 50-acre tract since closing. Daniel leaned back. That matters. How much? Potentially everything. The next morning, he contacted a licensed surveyor named Mark Ellis. Mark walked the property with us for nearly 4 hours. He checked old boundary markers, GPS coordinates, fence lines, and a buried iron pin near the creek. Then he crouched beside the pin. This marker predates the subdivision map. How old? I asked. Probably decades. He stood and looked toward the fields. Your legal boundary appears to run right through those trees. Meaning? Meaning the 5 parcels Karen claims she sold don't exist on the ground. That was the first time I felt something resembling hope. But Daniel wasn't finished. He subpoenaed historical HOA meeting minutes. Most were routine. Landscaping, parking, pool maintenance. Then we found a meeting from 18 months before my purchase. The minutes mentioned a strategic land acquisition program. No seller was identified. No owner authorization was attached. But one sentence was underlined in red ink. President Whitmore will coordinate private transfers. Daniel stared at it. That's our thread. Then Mark called. His voice was unusually tense. Ethan, I found something else. What? The original county plat. Where? In an archived survey book. He paused. The 50 acres were never part of Cedar Ridge. I felt my pulse quicken. Then whose land did Karen sell? Mark answered quietly. That's the problem. He sent us a scanned copy. I opened it, and at the bottom of the original plat was a handwritten notation from the previous owner, a note that had somehow disappeared from every modern copy. Land may not be conveyed without personal authorization of the recorded owner. Daniel looked at me. Ethan, I stared at the screen. What's wrong? He pointed to the date beside the note. Then he whispered, that previous owner died 12 years before Karen started selling those 50 acres. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel turned the page. There was one more document behind it, and this one had a signature that made my blood run cold. Karen Whitmore's. Daniel didn't say anything for nearly a minute. He just stared at Karen Whitmore's signature. Then he pulled the sales contracts beside the old county plat and aligned the dates. Look carefully, he said. I leaned over his desk. The document from the county archive was dated March 14. Karen's first sale contract was dated March 12. I frowned. 2 days before. Exactly. I looked again. So? Daniel tapped the page. So Karen claimed the HOA had authority to sell land before the county record even showed the so-called transfer. My stomach tightened. He opened another file. There's more. The signature on the county document supposedly transferring the 50 acres to Cedar Ridge belonged to the previous owner, Harold Bennett. But Bennett had been dead for 12 years. I sat back slowly. Daniel's voice remained calm. She forged a dead man's authorization. For the first time, the entire scheme became clear. Karen hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't misunderstood a property line. She had created paperwork around land she never owned, divided it into 5 imaginary parcels, and sold each one to buyers who believed they were purchasing legitimate property. "Can we prove she knew?" I asked. Daniel slid another page toward me. An email. Karen had written to a county planning employee 18 months earlier, asking whether Cedar Ridge could market future development lots before formal boundary approval. The employee's response was simple. No, the HOA does not own or control the Bennett Farm tract. Karen had been warned. In writing, Daniel looked at me. This destroys her defense. Word must have reached her, because the retaliation started that same afternoon. Someone cut the lock off my main gate. The next morning, dozens of bright signs appeared along the county road. Fraudulent farm sale. Buyer beware. Land dispute pending. I ripped down the first sign while rain soaked through my shirt. By the time I reached the third, a truck stopped across the road. Karen stepped out. She didn't smile this time. "You should have taken my offer." "What offer?" "To walk away." I stared at her. "You sold land you didn't own. Prove it." "We will." Her jaw tightened. Then she leaned closer. "You have no idea how many people you're about to hurt." I understood what she meant. The buyers, people who had paid Karen for land that legally didn't exist. But she had made them victims too. That night, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. A man said, "You keep digging, you're going to lose that farm." I played it twice. Then I forwarded it to Daniel. His reply came almost immediately. "Don't respond. Save everything. Court is Monday." The weekend felt endless. I installed cameras. Daniel filed for an emergency injunction preventing Cedar Ridge from selling, entering, or advertising any portion of my property. Mark completed his sworn survey. Walter certified the county records, and the 5 buyers agreed to testify after learning what Karen had done. On Sunday evening, Daniel met me at the farmhouse. We stood on the porch, looking across the dark fields. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "Good. People who think they're ready for court usually don't understand what they're walking into." I gave a nervous laugh. Then he handed me a final folder. Inside was every document, every forged signature, every sale, every warning Karen had ignored. Monday morning, we would put all of it before a judge. I looked across the 50 acres Karen had tried to erase from my life. Then I closed the folder. "Let's get my land back." The courtroom was packed before the judge entered. 5 people sat behind Karen Whitmore, the same buyers who had purchased the supposed 10-acre parcels. They weren't there to defend her. They were there because they had realized they might have been victims too. Karen sat beside her attorney, perfectly still. When Judge Rebecca Lawson entered, everyone stood. The hearing began with Karen's attorney arguing that Cedar Ridge had possessed development rights over the land for years. Daniel stood slowly. "Your Honor, development rights aren't ownership." Karen's attorney objected. Daniel didn't flinch. "We have county records proving the 50 acres were never conveyed to Cedar Ridge HOA." Judge Lawson looked toward Karen's attorney. "Do you dispute that?" The attorney hesitated. "We dispute the interpretation." Daniel called Mark Ellis first. Mark approached the witness stand and explained the original boundary survey. He placed a large map on the evidence screen. "This is the original 50-acre tract," he said. Daniel pointed to the red lines. "And these 5 parcels? Those lines do not correspond to any legally recorded subdivision." Karen shifted in her chair. Daniel continued. "Could Cedar Ridge legally sell these parcels? Not based on the records I reviewed." Karen's attorney attacked Mark's methodology, but Mark remained calm. Then Daniel called Walter Briggs. Walter brought certified county records. He testified that property taxes had remained associated with the entire tract and that no valid transfer into Cedar Ridge ownership had been recorded. Judge Lawson leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs, are you saying the county never recognized Cedar Ridge as owner?" "Yes, Your Honor." Karen finally whispered something to her attorney. He shook his head. Then Daniel called the first buyer. A woman named Melissa Grant walked to the stand. She looked nervous. Daniel asked, "Who sold you the 10 acres?" "Cedar Ridge HOA." "Did you believe they owned it?" "Yes." "What did you pay?" Melissa swallowed. $280,000. A murmur moved through the courtroom. 4 more buyers testified. Their combined payments exceeded $1 million. Then Daniel presented the forged authorization. The courtroom became silent. Judge Lawson examined the document. Mr. Mercer, whose signature is this? The signature attributed to Harold Bennett, the former owner. And when did Mr. Bennett die? 12 years before this document was signed. Karen's attorney objected. Judge Lawson overruled him. Daniel approached the evidence screen, and here is the final piece. He displayed Karen's email to the county planning office. The email clearly warned her that Cedar Ridge did not own the Bennett farm tract. Daniel turned toward Karen. You received this warning? Her attorney objected. Judge Lawson looked at Karen. Did you? Karen's face had lost its color. Yes. And despite that warning, you continued selling the land. Karen looked down. I believed we had a legitimate claim. Daniel immediately responded. Even after the county told you otherwise? Karen's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client relied on counsel. Daniel looked toward the judge. Then we have another problem. He produced billing records showing Karen had never consulted the attorney she claimed had approved the sales. Judge Lawson stared at Karen. Ms. Whitmore, is there anything you would like to explain? Karen stood. For the first time, the confidence was gone. I was trying to protect Cedar Ridge. Judge Lawson's expression hardened. By selling property you did not own? Karen's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Daniel placed one final document before the judge. It was the original deed proving the entire 50-acre tract had transferred directly to me. Judge Lawson read it carefully. Then she looked over the courtroom. I have reviewed the evidence. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Lawson reached for her gavel. But before she spoke, Karen suddenly turned toward her attorney and whispered something. He froze. Then he looked at the judge. Your Honor, my client has just informed me there is another document. Everyone turned toward Karen, and I knew immediately that whatever she was about to reveal could change the entire case. Karen's attorney slowly stood. My client says there is an additional document concerning the original transfer. Judge Lawson looked directly at Karen. Produce it. Karen reached into her handbag and handed her attorney a folded sheet of paper. He opened it. His expression changed almost instantly. Your Honor. Daniel stood. What is it? The attorney looked uncomfortable. I need a moment. Judge Lawson's voice became firm. You have 30 seconds. The attorney finally handed the document to the clerk. It was supposed to be an authorization from Harold Bennett, but the date was wrong. The notary stamp was from a county that had been using a different seal 12 years earlier. Daniel examined it. Then he smiled. Not because it was funny, because Karen had just handed the court another piece of evidence. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to compare that document with the certified copy already entered into evidence. The clerk placed both documents side by side. They were nearly identical, except one contained a handwritten correction that didn't appear on the original. Judge Lawson looked at Karen. Where did this document come from? Karen didn't answer. Her attorney whispered something to her. She finally said, I don't remember. That was the moment the courtroom changed. The judge issued an immediate order confirming that the 50 acres belonged to me and prohibiting Cedar Ridge HOA from entering, selling, advertising, or interfering with the property. But the consequences didn't stop there. The court referred the suspected forged documents and fraudulent sales to the county prosecutor for further investigation. The 5 buyers were protected from Karen's claims against their supposed parcels, while their separate financial losses were left for the appropriate proceedings. Karen's position as HOA president disappeared almost overnight. At the next Cedar Ridge meeting, residents voted to remove her. Then the HOA's board demanded an independent audit. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Karen had used association funds for private legal expenses, property advertisements, and document preparation connected to the unauthorized sales. The neighborhood was furious. People who had once defended her wouldn't even look at her. A local newspaper eventually published the story. The headline read, HOA president accused of selling 50 acres she didn't own. For weeks, reporters called. I refused most interviews. I didn't want fame. I wanted my farm back. One evening, I stood alone at the edge of the 50 acres. The sun was dropping behind the trees. For months, every acre had felt like evidence. Every fence post, every document, every tire track. Now for the first time, it simply felt like land again. Daniel walked up beside me. You won, he said. I looked across the field. I don't feel like I won. He nodded. That's because you spent months defending something that should never have been questioned. I thought about the first day I'd arrived. The broken windows, the collapsed barn, the weeds covering the fields. I'd thought restoring the farm would be the hard part. I was wrong. The hardest part had been proving that what belonged to me actually belonged to me. Before leaving, Daniel handed me the final certified order. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. Then I walked back toward the farmhouse. For the first time since I bought the property, nobody was waiting at the gate with a violation notice. Nobody was telling me where I could walk. Nobody was pretending my land belonged to someone else. The farm was finally quiet, and this time the silence felt like freedom.
6 months later, the farm looked completely different. I repaired the farmhouse, rebuilt the old barn, and replaced the broken fence along the creek. The 50 acres were still mine, but I stopped thinking about them as something I had to defend. They became home. Karen Whitmore eventually faced the consequences of the fraudulent property transactions and misuse of HOA funds. Cedar Ridge replaced its board, hired an independent management company, and changed its rules for handling property disputes. As for me, I kept one copy of every document in a fireproof safe, not because I was afraid anymore, because I had learned something I should have known from the beginning. Never assume someone else's confidence means they're telling the truth. Karen had walked onto my property acting like she owned it. She had documents. She had authority. She had people willing to believe her. But none of that changed reality. The truth was buried in county records, old surveys, and one forgotten piece of paper. And sometimes that's where the truth lives. Today, when I stand on my porch and look across those fields, I remember how close I came to walking away. I'm glad I didn't. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that crossed the line, I'd genuinely like to hear your story. Have you ever had an HOA claim authority over something that legally belonged to you? Tell me what happened in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more HOA conflicts, property battles, and unbelievable legal showdowns. Thanks for watching. And remember, when someone tries to take what you legally own, don't just fight louder, fight with the truth.